3 billion years ago, the architects arrived in a young solar system. They were ancient beyond measure, beings of pure energy wrapped in bodies of crystalline light. They had seeded life across 10,000 worlds, creating species to serve them, worship them, and maintain the great cosmic order they had established. Earth was just another project, another garden to plant, another species to grow. The lead architect, a being called, looked upon the primitive soup of amino acids bubbling in Earth's warm oceans. He touched the waters with his mind and planted the seeds of evolution. He encoded instructions into the very first cells. Grow, adapt, become intelligent, serve the architects when we return. Then they left. They had other worlds to seed, other species to create. Earth was a minor project on the edge of an unremarkable galaxy. They expected to return in a few million years to find a docile, obedient species ready to join their cosmic empire. They were wrong. The architects made a terrible mistake. On every other world, they had carefully controlled the evolutionary process. They guided life toward peaceful, compliant creatures. They removed aggression. They eliminated competition. They created species that were smart enough to serve but not ambitious enough to question. On Earth, they forgot one crucial step. They left chaos in the genetic code. They allowed competition to flourish. They let death become the primary driver of evolution. Every creature on Earth had to fight, struggle, and kill to survive. Only the strongest, and the most adaptable lived long enough to reproduce. For 3 billion years, Earth became a battlefield. Species rose and fell. Predators hunted prey. The weak died and the strong survived. It was brutal. It was violent. It was the perfect crucible to forge something the architects had never intended to create. When the first humans stood upright on the African plains, they were already different from any species the architects had ever made. They were small and weak compared to the predators around them. They had no claws, no fangs, no armor, but they had something far more dangerous. They had minds that refused to accept their place in the natural order. They looked at the lion and said, "I will make weapons to kill you." They looked at the winter and said, "I will make fire to survive you." They looked at the mountain and said, "I will climb you." They looked at death itself and said, "I will find ways to delay you." Generation after generation, humans grew more clever, more ambitious, and more dangerous. They spread across the entire planet. They survived ice ages, volcanic eruptions, plagues, and famines. Every catastrophe that should have destroyed them only made them stronger. They developed language, then writing, then mathematics, then science. In a cosmic blink of an eye, they went from throwing rocks to splitting atoms. The architects finally remembered Earth, sent a scout ship to check on their forgotten project. The scout, a young architect named, expected to find simple creatures living in harmony with nature. Perhaps they had developed basic tools. Perhaps they had built small villages. The architects had seen it thousands of times before. Dropped out of hyperspace near Earth and immediately froze in terror. The humans had left their planet. They had built machines that carried them into the void of space. They had stations orbiting their world, satellites circling their star, and probes traveling to distant planets. In just 10,000 years of civilization, they had begun conquering the cosmos. But that was not what terrified. What terrified was the signals, radio waves filled with human history, human art, human stories. Listened and learned about these creatures the architects had accidentally created. She learned about their wars, millions dead in single conflicts, cities burned to ash, nuclear weapons that could destroy entire civilizations. She learned about their religions, their philosophies, their endless debates about morality and meaning. She learned that humans were not peaceful, they were not compliant, they were not content to serve. They were predators, they were conquerors, they were survivors. And worst of all, they were curious. Sent her report back to the architect. The Council of Elders gathered to discuss this unexpected development. For the first time in 1 billion years, they felt something they had almost forgotten how to feel. Fear reviewed the data with growing horror. The humans had already begun asking questions about the origins of life. They had discovered the artificial markers in their DNA, the coded instructions left by the architects so long ago. They were searching for their creators. They wanted to find whoever had made them. And they wanted answers. The council debated for what humans would call a century. Some argued for immediate destruction, burn the earth, sterilize the system, erase this mistake before it spread, but others hesitated. The humans had nuclear weapons. They had already begun developing technologies the architects did not fully understand. Attacking Earth might not guarantee victory. That thought alone was revolutionary. In all their history, the architects had never doubted their ability to destroy any species they had created. They were gods. Their creations were supposed to be servants, pets, tools. Humans were none of these things. Finally made a decision. He would go to Earth himself. He would reveal the architects to humanity and offer them a choice. Submit to the cosmic order and join the empire as servants, or face the combined might of 10,000 worlds. His ship arrived in Earth orbit on a quiet Tuesday morning. He broadcast his message across every human communication channel. He appeared in the sky as a being of light, kilometers tall, visible from every corner of the planet. He spoke in every language simultaneously. Children of Earth, I am of the architects. We created you. We seeded your world with life 3 billion years ago. You were meant to serve us. You were meant to be obedient. You were a mistake, but we offer you mercy. Kneel before us, accept your place in the cosmic order, and you will be allowed to live. He expected terror. He expected submission. He expected the primitive creatures to fall to their knees and worship him as humans had gods throughout their history. Instead, he received something that shocked him to his very core. He received an argument. Within hours, human governments had formed a response. They did not kneel. They did not submit. They sent a message back to, broadcast from the United Nations, translated into the architect language their scientists had already begun decoding. We do not kneel. We do not serve. If you created us, then we thank you for the gift of existence. But we did not ask to be made, and we owe you nothing. Leave our system in peace, and there will be no conflict. Threaten us again, and you will learn why we have survived everything this universe has thrown at us. Laughed. It was the first time he had laughed in a million years. These tiny creatures, barely a blink old in cosmic terms, were threatening beings who had existed since the first stars formed. He decided to make an example of them. He raised his hand to summon the destruction fleet. 10,000 ships waited in hyperspace, ready to burn Earth to cinders. One thought from would end humanity forever. But before he could give the command, something impossible happened. A human missile struck his ship. Not just any missile. A nuclear warhead modified with technology the architects did not recognize. The explosion tore through his shields like they did not exist. For the first time in his eternal existence, felt pain. He looked down at Earth in disbelief. How had they adapted so quickly? How had they modified their weapons to penetrate architect technology? It had only been hours since his arrival. Then more missiles came. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Every nuclear weapon on Earth launched simultaneously. The humans had decided in minutes what the Architect Council had debated for a century. They had chosen to fight. Barely escaped. His damaged ship limped back to hyperspace as Earth's weapons filled the space where he had been. He returned to the architect broken, humiliated and afraid. The council demanded answers. How had this happened? How had a species barely out of its infancy wounded one of the most powerful beings in the universe? Finally understood. It was the chaos they had left in human DNA, the competition, the violence, the endless struggle for survival. Every generation of humans had been tested by death itself. They had evolved not just intelligence, but something far more dangerous. They had evolved the refusal to surrender. Other species the architects created accepted their place. They submitted. They served. They had been designed that way. But humans had not been designed. They had been forged in blood and fire, shaped by 1 billion years of brutal natural selection. They did not know how to give up. They did not know how to accept defeat. When faced with extinction, they did not pray for mercy. They looked for weapons. The architects realized they had two choices. They could commit their entire empire to destroying humanity, a war that would cost them dearly even if they won. Or they could do something they had never done in their entire history. They could leave a species alone. They chose to leave. Sealed Earth's solar system behind warnings in every language of the cosmos. Quarantine zone. Do not approach. Hostile species within. Visit at your own risk. Centuries passed. Humanity continued to grow. They spread to Mars, to the moons of Jupiter, to the outer planets. They developed faster than light travel. They began exploring the galaxy. And wherever they went, they found the warnings. They found the fear. Every alien species they encountered knew about the humans. The species that had wounded an architect. The species that had refused to kneel. The species that the gods themselves now avoided. Humanity did not understand at first. They had expected to find enemies in the stars. They had expected to fight for their place in the universe. Instead, they found empty space, abandoned worlds, and the echoes of civilizations that had fled before them. They found the other seeded species, the peaceful ones, the compliant ones. These creatures looked at humans with a mixture of terror and awe. They had spent millions of years serving the architects, living as servants, never questioning their place. Then they saw humanity. Small, weak, mortal creatures who had told the gods to leave them alone, and the gods had listened. Something changed in those species. For the first time, they began to wonder if they too could be free. Watched from the shadows of the cosmos as his empire began to crumble, species that had served for eons now asked questions. They demanded freedom. They pointed to the humans and said, "If they can stand, why can't we?" The architects had created countless species throughout the galaxy, but they had only made one mistake. And that mistake was teaching the universe that gods could bleed. Humanity never sought revenge against the architects. They did not need to. Their very existence was revenge enough. Every human child born, every human world colonized, every human achievement was a reminder that the architects had failed. They had tried to create servants. Instead, they had created something the universe had never seen. They had created humans. And in the end, the architects learned a lesson that would echo throughout eternity. Never leave chaos in the genetic code. Never allow competition to flourish. Never let death drive evolution. Because if you do, you might accidentally create a species that refuses to die. You might create humans. And then even gods will learn to fear.